There is a particular kind of silence that follows when someone stops listening to you mid-sentence. You are still talking. Your mouth is still moving. Words are still coming out, but you can see it in their eyes. Something has shifted. Their attention has drifted somewhere else. Maybe they glance at their phone. Maybe they start nodding a little too quickly, the way people nod when they have already decided to stop engaging. Maybe they just look past you at something or nothing in particular, and you feel it. Even if you finish your sentence, you feel it. That moment is one of the most quietly uncomfortable experiences in human interaction. Not because it is dramatic or devastating, but because it is so ordinary. It happens in meetings. It happens at dinner tables. It happens mid-conversation with people you care about. And what makes it uncomfortable is not just that they stopped listening. It is the question that follows immediately after. Why? You wonder if you said something wrong. You wonder if your topic was boring. You wonder if the problem is your voice, your energy, your presence, or simply the words you chose. You run through the moment trying to find where you lost them, and sometimes you cannot identify a single thing. You just know the connection broke. Most people, when they feel unheard, arrive at one of two conclusions. The first conclusion is that they need to say more detail, more explanation, more context. They believe the problem is volume or quantity. If they could just add more, the listener would eventually understand. So they keep talking, filling the space with words, hoping that somewhere in the accumulation of sentences something will land. The second conclusion is more painful. They decide that the problem is them, that they are simply not interesting enough, not smart enough, not charismatic enough, that some people are just born with the ability to command attention, and they are not one of those people. Both conclusions are wrong, and this audiobook is going to show you why. Think about the last time you were completely held by someone's words. It might have been a conversation. It might have been a speaker you watched. It might have been someone you know personally who has this quality that is hard to name but easy to feel. When they speak, you lean in slightly. You do not want to interrupt. You are not thinking about what you are going to say next. You are just listening. Now think about what made that different. It probably was not volume. They were not necessarily louder than other people. It probably was not speed. They were not racing through their thoughts, and it probably was not that their content was objectively more interesting than everything else you had heard that week. What you likely felt was clarity. You felt presence. You felt like they actually knew what they wanted to say, and they were saying it without hesitation and without apology. You felt like they were speaking to you, not at you. That quality is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like every skill, it can be understood, practiced, and developed. You are listening to this audiobook because somewhere inside you, you know that the way you communicate right now is not fully expressing what you think, what you feel, or what you know. You have ideas that do not come out clearly. You have thoughts that evaporate the moment someone challenges them. You have things you want to say, but by the time you say them, the moment has passed or the energy has changed. You are not alone in this. Most people walk through their lives carrying more intelligence, more insight, more feeling, and more depth than they ever successfully communicate to others. Not because they lack anything, but because no one ever taught them how the voice carries meaning, how structure shapes comprehension, how pace creates trust, and how presence determines whether a person leans in or checks out. This audiobook is not about tricks. It is not about hacking someone's attention or forcing people to listen to you against their natural inclination. Manipulation is not communication. Manipulation exploits. Communication connects. What this audiobook is about is something more fundamental. It is about understanding how attention actually works. It is about understanding what causes people to disconnect and what draws them back. It is about learning to think more clearly before you speak, to deliver your words with control and intention, and to be present in a way that makes the other person feel like what you are saying actually matters. Because here is the truth that most communication advice ignores. People do not listen to words. They listen to the person behind the words. They are picking up on something deeper than vocabulary or sentence structure. They are sensing whether you believe what you are saying. They are feeling whether you are present or distracted. They are experiencing whether you are speaking from clarity or from anxiety. And when those underlying qualities are strong, the words almost do not matter. People follow along. They stay engaged. They remember what you said. When those underlying qualities are weak, no amount of clever phrasing will save you. So that is where this audiobook begins. Not with tactics, with understanding. With an honest look at why people stop listening and what it actually takes to hold their attention in a way that feels natural, calm, and genuine. You have more to say than you think, and more people are willing to listen than you realize. You just need to learn how to reach them. If something in this audiobook connects with your own experience, feel free to share it in the comments. Sometimes putting it into words helps you understand it more clearly. I do read them. Before you can improve how you speak, you need to understand something that most people never stop to examine. You need to understand why people stop listening in the first place. Not in theory, in practice. In the real, ordinary moments of conversation and presentation and connection where attention quietly exits the room. The human brain is not a passive receiver. It does not sit open and empty, waiting for you to fill it with your words. It is constantly active, constantly filtering, constantly evaluating whether what it is receiving is worth the energy required to process it. The brain is, in a very practical sense, always asking one question on behalf of the person listening to you. That question is, does this matter right now? When the answer feels like yes, attention stays. When the answer starts to feel like no, or even maybe, attention begins to drift. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach speaking. The first reason people stop listening is overload. When someone speaks too fast, includes too much information, or fails to give the listener enough space to absorb what has been said, the listener's processing capacity fills up and they start to disconnect. It is not a conscious decision. It happens the way a cup overflows when you pour too much water too quickly. There is only so much the mind can hold at one time, and when that threshold is crossed, the brain protects itself by checking out. Many people make this mistake without knowing it. They have so much to say. They have been thinking about a topic for a long time. They feel excited or nervous or urgent about getting their point across. And so they pour everything out at once, flooding the conversation with information, details, context, qualifications, and examples all layered on top of each other. The listener, on the other end of all of this, does not feel informed. They feel overwhelmed, and overwhelmed listeners become absent listeners very quickly. The solution to overload is not silence. It is selection. It is the discipline to choose what matters most in this moment and say that clearly, rather than saying everything you know. The second reason people stop listening is uncertainty about where you are going. When someone speaks without a clear direction, the listener's brain spends enormous energy trying to figure out the point. They are not just receiving your words. They are simultaneously constructing a map of the conversation, trying to understand where it is heading and why they should care. When that map never becomes clear, when sentence follows sentence but no destination appears, the brain eventually gives up. This is one of the most common causes of lost attention in everyday conversation, not because the speaker is boring, but because the speaker has not decided what they actually want to say before saying it. They are thinking out loud, working out their ideas in real time, and expecting the listener to follow them through the entire process of their own confusion. Sometimes that works among very close friends or trusted colleagues who know you well enough to stay with you through ambiguity. But in most conversations, most of the time, a listener needs to feel early on that you know where you are going. They need a subtle signal, conscious or unconscious, that there is a destination to this and it is worth staying for. The third reason people stop listening is emotional disconnection. This one is harder to explain, but easier to feel. When someone speaks in a way that is entirely flat, entirely intellectual, entirely devoid of emotional texture, the listener's nervous system does not engage. You can have the most accurate, relevant, well-organized information in the world, but if your delivery carries no sense of why it matters to you, no trace of genuine feeling or investment, the other person will struggle to feel engaged. Human beings are social creatures. They are wired to respond to other human beings, not just to content. And one of the primary ways they determine whether to pay attention is by reading the emotional signal of the person speaking. When that signal is absent, when the speaker seems disconnected from their own words, the listener mirrors that disconnection. This does not mean you need to perform emotion. Performed emotion is actually worse than none at all, because people can sense inauthenticity even faster than they sense flatness. What it means is that you need to actually be connected to what you are saying. You need to be present in it. The fourth reason people stop listening is speaking for too long without acknowledgement. Conversation is not a one-way transmission. Even when someone is primarily listening, they are doing so as a participant in an exchange. When a speaker goes on for too long without checking in, without creating space, without acknowledging the presence of the other person, the listener begins to feel invisible. And invisible people disconnect. This happens in monologues. It happens in long explanations where the speaker is so focused on delivering their information that they forget a person is standing in front of them. It happens when someone confuses talking at length with communicating fully. Real communication includes the listener. It creates moments where they can process, respond, or simply feel acknowledged. When those moments are absent, the exchange becomes less like a conversation and more like a lecture. And most people, most of the time, did not sign up for a lecture. The fifth reason people stop listening is lack of confidence in the speaker. This one is subtle, but it operates constantly beneath the surface of every conversation. People are very good at sensing uncertainty. They pick it up not from what you say, but from how you say it. They hear it in the slight hesitation before key words. They feel it in the trailing off of sentences that never quite land. They see it in the downward glance at the wrong moment or the over-explaining that reveals a deeper fear that you have not been understood. When a listener senses that the speaker does not fully believe in what they are saying or does not fully trust their own right to say it, confidence in the speaker begins to erode. And once that happens, the listener starts evaluating everything more critically. They are no longer just listening, they are judging, questioning, and that process is inherently less engaged than simple, open attention. Confidence, in this context, does not mean arrogance. It does not mean pretending to know things you do not. It means speaking with the quiet assurance of someone who has thought about what they want to say and trusts that it is worth saying. The sixth reason is one that nobody likes to hear, but it is important. Sometimes people stop listening because the speaker talks about themselves too much, for too long, without connecting it back to something the listener can recognize or care about. There is a natural human tendency, when nervous or excited, to overshare personal context, to explain too much about your own experience without creating a bridge to the other person's experience. The listener then finds themselves sitting with all of this information about you, wondering what they are supposed to do with it, and gradually disengaging. This is not about selfishness. It is about relevance. Every conversation involves an implicit contract. You are taking up someone's time and attention. That contract is renewed continuously based on whether what you are saying holds value for them. When you lose sight of that, when you speak primarily for yourself rather than for the connection between you, the contract breaks. Understanding these 6 patterns is not about judging yourself or cataloging every mistake you have ever made in conversation. It is about developing awareness. The kind of awareness that lets you notice, in real time, when you are overloading or losing direction, or disconnecting emotionally, or talking for too long. Awareness is always the beginning of change, and change in communication does not require a complete transformation of who you are. It requires small, consistent adjustments that compound over time into something that feels natural, genuine, and genuinely effective. If there is one thing that separates people who communicate with real power from those who struggle to be heard, it is not charisma. It is not personality. It is not even confidence in the traditional sense. It is clarity of thought. And the reason most people overlook this is because they assume that if they know what they think, they can say what they think. But knowing what you think and being able to articulate what you think are 2 very different things. There is a gap between those 2 places, and most communication problems live in that gap. Think about the last time you tried to explain something important and it came out wrong. Not wrong in the sense that you said something inaccurate, but wrong in the sense that it did not match what you were actually trying to express. You knew the feeling. You knew the idea, but somewhere between your mind and your mouth, something got tangled. The listener looked at you with a slight frown, or a polite nod that meant nothing, and you felt the gap between what you meant and what they received. That gap is not a communication problem in the way people normally think of communication problems. It is a thinking problem. When your thinking is fuzzy, your speaking will be fuzzy. When your thinking is scattered, your words will be scattered. When you are unclear about what you actually believe or want to convey, that unclarity will travel through every sentence you speak, and the listener will feel it even if they cannot name it. So this section is not about technique. It is about something that comes before technique. It is about learning to think clearly before you open your mouth. The first principle of clear thinking is understanding the difference between knowing something and understanding something. Most people carry around a vast collection of things they know: facts, opinions, beliefs, experiences, impressions, half-formed conclusions. They have been absorbing information their whole lives. But knowing and understanding are not the same thing. Knowing is possession. Understanding is depth. And only understanding produces clarity in speaking. When you understand something, you can explain it simply. You can explain it from multiple angles. You can respond to a challenge without losing your footing. You can meet the listener where they are and find the version of the idea that fits their context. When you only know something, you can repeat it. You can recite it. But when pressed, when the question shifts slightly or the angle changes, you struggle. You feel the surface begin to crack because there is nothing solid underneath. The practice of moving from knowing to understanding is the practice of asking deeper questions about what you believe and why you believe it. It is the habit of not stopping at the first answer, of pushing further, of testing the idea against other ideas until what remains is something you can hold with confidence. This practice takes time, but it is the single most valuable investment you can make in your ability to communicate effectively. Because when you genuinely understand something, it changes how you speak about it. The hesitation disappears. The qualification becomes choice rather than protection. The explanation becomes natural rather than effortful. The second principle is learning to identify your central idea before you begin speaking. This sounds almost painfully simple, but it is the thing most people skip. They begin speaking before they have identified, clearly and precisely, what they actually want to say. They have a general area of interest, a topic, a feeling about something, but not a specific, defined, articulatable idea. The difference between a topic and an idea is crucial. A topic is a space. An idea is a statement. A topic is leadership. An idea is the most effective leaders create environments where other people feel safe to think. A topic is communication. An idea is most people are not heard because they have not thought clearly about what they want to say. A topic is open-ended. An idea has direction. When you begin speaking from a topic without an idea, you wander. You circle. You keep arriving at almost something but never quite landing. The listener can feel this. They are waiting for the point, and when the point keeps not arriving, they start to move on. When you begin from a clear idea, everything else organizes around it. Your examples support it. Your anecdotes illustrate it. Your questions open it. There is a center of gravity, and everything you say is in relationship to that center. The discipline of identifying your central idea before speaking is a practice. It requires a moment of deliberate thought before a conversation, especially an important one. It requires you to ask yourself, quietly and honestly, what is the one thing I want this person to understand when this conversation is over? That question will clear away the noise more effectively than anything else. The third principle is learning to separate your thoughts from your feelings during the process of preparing to speak. This is not about suppressing emotion. Emotion has a vital role in communication, and we will come to that in full later. But when you are preparing to say something important, when you are trying to organize what you think, emotion can be a source of noise rather than signal. When you are anxious about a conversation, that anxiety can distort your thinking. You start preparing not for the conversation you are going to have, but for the worst version of the conversation you are afraid of. You add defensive explanations. You anticipate objections that may never come. You over-qualify statements that did not need qualification, and the result is a version of your message that has been shaped more by fear than by clarity. When you are angry, you lead with intensity rather than precision. You prioritize your feeling over the idea, and the idea gets lost inside the emotion. The listener responds to the emotional temperature rather than the content, and suddenly you are having a completely different conversation from the one you intended. Separating thought from feeling is not about coldness. It is about sequence. Feel what you feel. Acknowledge it. But then set it aside long enough to identify what you actually want to say, without that feeling shaping the structure of the message. Then, once the idea is clear, you can allow the genuine feeling to inform how you deliver it. That is a very different thing from letting the feeling determine the structure. The fourth principle is the practice of simplification. There is a common belief, particularly among intelligent and knowledgeable people, that complexity is evidence of depth. That if you are saying something simple, you must be missing something. That the more nuanced and elaborate your thinking, the more sophisticated you appear. This belief is one of the most damaging things you can bring into communication. Simplicity is not the absence of depth. Simplicity is the result of depth. When you truly understand something, you can explain it simply. When you struggle to explain something simply, that struggle is not a sign that the idea is too complex. It is a sign that you have not finished understanding it. The clearest thinkers in history, across science, philosophy, literature, and leadership, shared one quality. They could take enormous complexity and find the simple core. Not because they were ignoring the complexity, but because they had worked through it fully enough to know what mattered most. You do not need to simplify every idea before every conversation, but you should practice asking, for every important thing you want to say, what is the simplest version of this that is still true? What is the fewest number of words that contains this idea without losing it? That practice will change how you speak. Over time, it will change how you think. The fifth principle is listening to yourself, not in a narcissistic way, in a practical way. Most people have never actually heard themselves speak in any sustained way. They do not know how they sound. They do not know how fast they talk. They do not know which words they use too often, which sentences they never finish, which explanations they repeat 3 times as if once was not enough. Listening to yourself means developing awareness of your own communication patterns. It means occasionally recording yourself speaking, not to obsess over imperfections, but to observe, to notice, to hear yourself the way others hear you. When you first do this, it can be uncomfortable. Most people dislike the sound of their own voice on recording, but underneath that discomfort is genuinely useful information. You may notice that you qualify nearly every statement with "I think," or "maybe," or "kind of," which subtly undermines your own authority. You may notice that your sentences run very long without natural pauses, making them difficult to follow. You may notice that you have verbal fillers, certain words or sounds that appear constantly and fragment your delivery. None of these things are permanent. They are patterns, and patterns can be changed once you see them clearly. Listening to yourself is the beginning of the feedback loop that all effective communicators develop over time. They have trained themselves to notice, in real time, when their communication is clear and when it is not. That real-time awareness is enormously powerful. It means you can adjust mid-conversation rather than analyzing everything afterward when nothing can be changed. The 6th principle is developing the habit of preparation. This does not mean scripting. Scripted conversations are rarely good conversations. When someone has memorized what they want to say, there is a rigidity to their delivery that the listener feels. It removes the quality of presence that makes communication alive. But preparation and scripting are not the same thing. Preparation means knowing your central idea before you speak. It means having thought through the context of what you want to say. It means having considered who you are speaking to, what they already know, what they care about, and what kind of framing will help them receive what you have to say. Preparation is thinking done in advance so that your delivery can be present. When you are prepared, you are not focused on figuring out what to say. You already know what to say. That frees your attention to focus on the other person, on the energy of the room, on the subtle cues that tell you how your words are landing and whether you need to adjust. That quality of attention is what separates speaking that connects from speaking that merely fills time. The 7th and final principle of clear thinking is accepting uncertainty and incompleteness. Not every idea you want to communicate will be fully formed. Not every question you are asked will have an answer you are certain of. And one of the most quietly powerful things you can learn to do is speak clearly about what you do not know without allowing that uncertainty to undermine your presence. People who struggle with this often do one of 2 things. They either overclaim, stating certainty they do not have in order to appear confident, or they underclaim, hedging and qualifying so much that no actual statement ever gets made. Neither serves you. The clear, confident way to handle uncertainty is simply to name it. To say, "I do not have a complete answer to that yet, but here is what I do know," or "this is where my thinking is right now, and I am still working through it." That kind of honesty is not weakness. It is precision, and precision in communication always reads as intelligence. When your thinking is clear, your speaking becomes clear. And when your speaking is clear, something remarkable happens. People listen. Not because you have commanded their attention, not because you have used some technique to keep them engaged, but because clarity, real clarity, is relatively rare. And when people encounter it, they instinctively lean in, they pay attention, they remember what was said. Clear thinking is the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. You can have the clearest thinking in the room. You can have identified your central idea with precision. You can have prepared thoughtfully and simplified effectively. And still, if your delivery is off, none of it will land the way it should. Delivery is the vehicle that carries thought into the listener's experience. It is the medium through which your words travel from your mind to theirs. And like any vehicle, It can be well maintained or poorly maintained. It can serve the journey or it can undermine it. Most people think of delivery as style, a superficial layer of presentation that either exists or does not. Either you have a compelling voice or you do not. Either you are naturally engaging or you are not. That is not how delivery works. Delivery is not style. It is a set of skills, skills that respond to awareness and practice and intention. Let us start with pace. Pace is probably the most underestimated element of spoken communication. Most people who speak ineffectively do so in part because of pace, and almost none of them know it. Speaking too fast is the most common problem. When you speak fast, several things happen simultaneously, none of them good. The listener cannot absorb information at the speed you are delivering it. Words blur together. Meaning gets compressed. The listener's brain starts falling behind, and once they fall behind, they often give up rather than keep trying to catch up. But beyond comprehension, pace carries emotional information. When you speak very fast, you signal urgency, and urgency signals anxiety. The listener may not consciously think this person is anxious, but they will feel something that makes them slightly less comfortable, slightly less settled. That feeling makes attention harder to sustain. Slowing down does something different. It signals that you are comfortable. It signals that you believe what you are saying is worth taking time over. It invites the listener to settle in rather than scramble to keep up. The interesting paradox of pace is this: the slower you speak, within reason, the more credible you seem, not because slowness implies intelligence, but because it implies certainty. People who are not sure what they want to say tend to rush toward the end of sentences, hoping to reach the period before anyone notices the confusion in the middle. People who are certain speak at a pace that suggests they know exactly where they are going and trust the listener to follow. Pausing is the partner of pace, and it deserves its own attention. A pause in speech is not empty space. A pause is communication. It is one of the most powerful tools in delivery and one of the least used. A pause before an important statement creates anticipation. It signals to the listener, pay attention here. Something worth hearing is coming. A pause after an important statement gives the listener time to absorb what was said. Without that pause, you move on before they have had the chance to fully receive what you just gave them. It is like handing someone a glass of water and immediately refilling it before they have had a chance to drink. Pauses also do something psychological. They demonstrate composure. In a culture where silence in conversation is often treated as something to be filled, as a problem to be solved, choosing to pause consciously says something. It says you are not anxious. You are not scrambling. You are simply waiting for the right moment to continue. Most people's instinct, especially when nervous, is to fill every silence with sound. A filler word, a repeated phrase, a new thought that was not fully formed. Learning to be comfortable with silence is one of the most powerful things you can practice. Tone is the next element of delivery, and it carries more information than most people realize. Tone is not just about pleasant or unpleasant. It is about the entire emotional landscape of how you speak, the warmth or distance in your voice, the steadiness or volatility of its energy, the way it rises and falls through a sentence. Here is something important about tone: your listener is always reading it, even when they are not listening to your words, even in a language they do not understand. Tone carries meaning independently of vocabulary. It communicates feeling, intention, and relationship. When your tone is monotone, flat and unchanging throughout your speech, the listener's brain begins to lose interest. Monotone is the vocal equivalent of a completely flat landscape. There is nothing to navigate toward, nothing to respond to, nothing to create variation in attention. The ear gets bored. But the solution to monotone is not performance. It is not speaking in an exaggerated, theatrical way that feels artificial. The solution is genuine engagement with what you are saying. When you actually care about something, your tone naturally varies. It rises slightly when you want to emphasize. It drops slightly when you want to ground a point. It carries warmth when you are connecting with the listener, and focus when you want them to follow your reasoning. These variations are not performed. They are the natural expression of someone who is genuinely present in what they are saying. This is why going through the motions of communication without being truly connected to the content almost always produces flat delivery. The technique is there, but the life is not. And listeners feel the absence of life more than they appreciate the presence of technique. Volume is simpler but still worth addressing directly. Speaking too quietly is not humility. Speaking too loudly is not confidence. Both extremes communicate something about the speaker's relationship to their own words. Speaking too quietly can signal that you are not sure your words deserve to be heard. It creates a subtle dynamic where the listener has to work too hard to receive what you are saying, which means you are placing a burden on them rather than on yourself. Eventually, the listener decides the effort is not worth it and disengages. Speaking too loudly creates pressure rather than connection. It can read as aggression or desperation, and it tends to push rather than invite. There is a difference between a voice that fills a room comfortably and a voice that dominates it. One draws people in. The other keeps them at arm's length. The right volume is the one that feels effortless for the listener to receive. Not too quiet that they are straining, not so loud that they are slightly defensive. It is a calibration that you can develop over time simply by paying attention to the response you are getting. Are people leaning in or sitting back? Articulation is the clarity of the words themselves as they come out. When you speak through clenched teeth, or mumble slightly at the ends of sentences, or swallow key words, you create small moments of confusion for the listener. They miss something. They are not sure they heard correctly. And rather than asking you to repeat yourself, which most people are reluctant to do, they simply piece together what they think you meant. The more of those small gaps there are, the more disconnected their version of your message becomes from the one you intended to deliver. Articulation does not mean speaking like a broadcaster. It means giving your words the physical space they need to land. Opening your mouth enough, letting the endings of sentences be as clear as the beginnings. Not trailing off when you reach the most important part of a sentence, which is a very common habit. The final element of delivery this section addresses is eye contact, or, in the broader context of speaking, the quality of your attention toward the other person. Eye contact in conversation does something that words cannot do alone. It says, I am here. I am saying this to you specifically, not to a room, not to a general audience, not to the air, to you. When someone holds your gaze steadily while saying something important, you feel it. The words carry more weight. You feel spoken to rather than spoken at. And when you feel spoken to, you pay attention. Conversely, when someone avoids eye contact while speaking, the listener unconsciously registers a disconnect. The words are coming, but the person does not quite seem to be here, and that quality of absence in the speaker produces absence in the listener. Eye contact, it is worth noting, does not mean staring. Comfortable eye contact is not fixed or forced. It is present and natural, looking at the person and occasionally away, the way two people engaged in genuine conversation naturally do. The key quality is not duration but intention. When you look at someone while saying something, it should feel like you are actually looking at them. Not performing attention, but experiencing it. All of these elements of delivery, pace, pause, tone, volume, articulation, and presence are deeply connected to one thing. They are all expressions of your internal state. When you are calm, your pace steadies. When you are genuinely engaged, your tone comes alive. When you believe what you are saying, your volume finds its natural level. When you are present, your eye contact becomes real rather than rehearsed. This means that the deepest work in delivery is not practice in front of a mirror. It is the work of learning to be genuinely calm, genuinely present, and genuinely connected to your own words. Because delivery is not what you do with your voice, it is what your voice reveals about your state of mind. And when that state of mind is clear and settled and present, the delivery takes care of itself. There is a kind of communication that is technically correct in every measurable way. The information is accurate. The structure is logical. The pace is appropriate. The words are clear. And yet, when the conversation ends, nothing has been truly exchanged. Something was transmitted, but nothing was received. The listener walked away with data but not meaning, with words but not feeling, with information but not connection. You have probably experienced this on both sides. You have probably sat through perfectly organized presentations that left you feeling nothing. And you have probably been in conversations with people who said relatively simple things, things that were not especially eloquent or particularly original, but that made you feel genuinely understood. The difference is emotional presence. Emotional presence is not a performance of emotion. It is not manufactured enthusiasm or forced warmth. It is not the speaker saying how excited they are while their eyes say something completely different. That kind of performance is something people detect instantly and find deeply uncomfortable because it creates a mismatch between what is being said and what is being felt, and humans are exquisitely sensitive to that mismatch. Emotional presence is simply being genuinely in the moment, being actually affected by what you are talking about, being truly aware of and interested in the person in front of you. It sounds simple. It is actually quite rare. Most people, when they speak, are managing at least two things simultaneously. They are speaking, and they are monitoring how they are coming across. They are delivering their words, and they are evaluating their own performance in real time. They are inside the conversation and observing it from outside at the same time, and that division of attention is exactly what reduces emotional presence. When you are focused on how you seem, you are not focused on what you mean, and the listener feels the difference. Let us talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability is one of the most misunderstood concepts in communication. Many people hear the word and think of confession, of sharing weakness, of exposing yourself in ways that feel risky or uncomfortable. And while that kind of vulnerability has its place, it is not what drives connection in most conversations. The vulnerability that creates connection is much simpler. It is the willingness to actually mean what you say, to allow what matters to you to be visible in how you speak about it, to not hide behind information or structure or professionalism when what the moment calls for is genuine feeling. This can look like many things. It can look like speaking about something you care about with real warmth rather than practiced neutrality. It can look like acknowledging when something is difficult rather than pretending otherwise. It can look like saying simply and honestly, "This matters to me, and here is why." None of that requires dramatic self-revelation. It just requires the willingness to be real. People respond to realness, not to perfection, not to polish. To the sense that the person speaking is genuinely here, genuinely means what they are saying, and is not performing a version of themselves that has been pre-approved for public consumption. Now let us talk about empathy and listening, because emotional presence is not only about what you bring to the speaking. It is about what you bring to the listening. If you are in a conversation and you are only thinking about what you want to say next, you are not really present with the other person. You are physically there, but you are mentally in your own experience rather than in the shared space between you. Genuine listening, the kind that the other person can feel, requires you to set aside your own internal commentary long enough to actually receive what the other person is communicating. Not just their words, their tone, their pace, the slight hesitation before a particular phrase, the thing they seem to want to say but are not quite saying. When you listen like that, something happens in the conversation. The other person feels it. They feel heard in a way that is deeper than having their words acknowledged. They feel seen, and people who feel seen naturally open. They engage more fully. They are more present with you in return. This is how genuine conversations create real connection, not because of clever questions or empathetic statements, but because of the quality of attention that moves between two people. There is a concept worth naming here, because once you see it, you will recognize it everywhere. It is called reciprocal presence. Reciprocal presence is the phenomenon where your quality of presence directly influences the quality of presence in the person you are speaking with. When you are distracted, they feel slightly less inclined to be fully engaged. When you are fully present, they feel pulled toward greater presence themselves. This is why the most compelling speakers and conversationalists do not need to work very hard to hold attention. Their presence creates presence. Their engagement invites engagement. The listener feels, not consciously but viscerally, that something real is happening here and that they should pay attention because of it. Learning to cultivate this quality in yourself is less about technique and more about practice. The practice of actually being where you are, of noticing when you have drifted and choosing to return, of caring about the person in front of you enough to give them your full, undivided, genuine attention. Authenticity deserves its own attention in this section. The word has been used so often that it has nearly lost its meaning. But underneath the overuse is something genuinely important. Authenticity in communication means speaking in a way that is consistent with who you actually are, what you actually believe, and what you actually feel. The opposite of authentic communication is performed communication, and performed communication, even when executed well, creates a subtle unease in the listener. They cannot always name it. They just feel slightly less comfortable, slightly less trusting, slightly less connected than they would if the speaker were simply being real. This matters because many people, in trying to improve their communication, adopt styles that do not fit them. They try to sound like someone they admire, or follow a communication template they have read about, or perform a version of confidence or warmth that does not match their natural way of being. And the result is stilted, awkward, unconvincing, not because they lack skill, but because they are wearing someone else's voice. Your natural voice, developed and refined and made more intentional, will always be more effective than a borrowed voice used perfectly. Because the borrowed voice, no matter how polished, does not carry you in it, and it is you that the listener is ultimately connecting with. This does not mean you should not develop your communication. It means that development should feel like growth rather than replacement, like finding more of yourself rather than becoming someone else. Let us talk about how emotional presence changes the way people receive what you say. When you speak with genuine emotion and presence, your words are processed differently by the listener's brain, not just cognitively but physiologically. Studies in neuroscience and social psychology have consistently shown that emotional engagement activates deeper processing. What is received emotionally is retained longer, recalled more accurately, and integrated more fully into the listener's understanding. In other words, a message delivered with genuine feeling is not just more enjoyable to receive. It is more effective. It gets in further. It stays longer. This is why the most memorable things you have ever been told were probably not the most logically perfect things. They were things said with feeling, by someone who was genuinely present with you in the moment of saying them. Those words settled into you at a different level than information. They became part of how you understand things. That is the power of emotional presence, not as manipulation or persuasion, but as a deepening of the communication so that it reaches the person at more than just the surface. There is one more element of emotional presence that needs to be addressed, and it is one that many people resist because it feels risky: the willingness to be affected. Most people try to protect themselves in conversation, to not react too much. to not let their face show everything they feel, to maintain a kind of emotional composure that they believe looks strong or professional or controlled. But there is a difference between emotional composure and emotional absence. Composure is steadiness, absence is disconnection, and when you are emotionally absent in a conversation, you send a signal to the other person that this exchange does not really touch you, that you are processing it from behind glass. Being willing to be affected means allowing your genuine responses to be visible, to let your face show that you find something interesting, to let your voice carry warmth when you feel it, to let your listening be alive rather than politely formal. This does not mean being emotionally unregulated. It means being emotionally present. It means choosing, consciously and bravely, to show up fully rather than managing yourself from a distance. That choice changes everything about how people experience you, and it changes everything about how you experience conversations. Because the conversations that matter most, the ones that stay with you, the ones that actually change something, are never the ones where two people were perfectly controlled and technically correct. They are the ones where something real moved between two people. If you recognize yourself in parts of this, you are not alone. You can share your thoughts in the comments if you want to. You have probably heard the phrase, "keep it simple." You have probably agreed with it in principle while continuing to make things complicated in practice. That gap between agreeing with simplicity and actually achieving it is one of the most interesting challenges in communication, and it is worth understanding why it exists before trying to close it. The drive toward complexity in communication comes from several places. It comes from a desire to be thorough. You know a great deal about your subject, and leaving things out feels like failing the listener. What if they need that detail? What if the one piece of information you cut turns out to be the piece that was most important to them? It comes from a desire to protect yourself. Complexity provides cover. If you say more, qualify more, add more layers, it becomes harder for anyone to find a specific flaw in your reasoning. You have included something to address every possible objection. You have covered every angle. It comes from a belief that complexity demonstrates competence, that the more nuanced and detailed your explanation, the more knowledgeable you appear. All of these drives are understandable, and all of them, when they drive communication, make you harder to listen to and harder to understand. Let us start with structure, because structure is what makes simplicity possible without making it shallow. Structure is not the opposite of depth. Structure is the scaffolding that allows depth to be accessed. Without structure, depth becomes a labyrinth. With structure, it becomes a path. The most basic and powerful structure in communication is the three-part principle. It is ancient, present in almost every tradition of rhetoric, storytelling, and public speaking, and it endures because it maps onto the way the human mind naturally processes information. The first part is the setup. What is the situation? What do we need to understand before the main point can land? What context does the listener need in order for the next part to make sense? The second part is the central idea. This is what you actually want to say, the core point, the insight, the argument, the thing the rest of the conversation is organized around. The third part is the implication. What does this mean? What should the listener think, feel, or do as a result of understanding this? Why does it matter? Setup, central idea, implication. It does not have to be rigid. It does not have to be obvious. But when these three elements are present and in the right order, communication has a completeness to it that the listener intuitively recognizes. When one of the elements is missing, something feels off. A communication that has only setup and central idea, but no implication, leaves the listener satisfied intellectually, but unsure what to do with what they have received. A communication that has central idea and implication, but no setup, often loses people before the main point arrives because they do not yet have the context needed to receive it. When all three are present, and the listener can feel each of them, the communication lands. Let us talk about simplifying without losing truth. There is a fear that making something simple means making it less accurate, that you are cutting corners, leaving out important nuance, sacrificing precision for accessibility. And this fear is not entirely unfounded. There are ways of simplifying that do distort. There are reductions that go too far, that strip away so much that what remains no longer reflects the complexity of the reality. But that is not what good simplification does. Good simplification is not reduction. It is refinement. It is the process of finding the most essential version of an idea, the version that carries the core truth without the weight of everything that is secondary or tangential. It is the difference between summarizing and distilling. When you distill an idea, you do not lose its power. You concentrate it. A distilled message carries the same truth as a complex one, but with more clarity, more force, and more accessibility. The listener receives it more fully, not less fully. The test of good simplification is this: when someone asks you a follow-up question, can you provide more depth? If yes, you have distilled. You have kept the complexity in reserve, available when needed, but you have presented the core clearly enough that the listener can choose whether to go further. If the simplified version was all you had, then you have reduced. The difference matters, and developing the ability to simplify without losing truth requires the deep understanding we discussed in the previous section. You can only distill what you have fully understood. You can only simplify what you have worked through completely. This is why the best explanations often come not from the person who has just learned something, but from the person who has known it for a long time. The person who has had years to work through all the complexity and find the center of it. You do not always have years, but you can develop the habit of asking, even in the moment before you speak, what is the actual center of this? What is the thing I would say if I could only say one thing? That question is a powerful tool. Now let us talk about the structure of stories, because stories are one of the most effective structural tools in communication. Human beings are wired for story, not as entertainment, but as cognition. Story is one of the primary ways the brain processes and retains information. An idea presented as a narrative is more memorable, more emotionally engaging, and more easily understood than the same idea presented as an abstraction. This does not mean every communication needs to be a dramatic narrative, but it does mean that where you can bring structure alive with a brief, concrete, specific example or anecdote, you should. Because the moment something becomes a scene, becomes a person and a situation and a moment in time, the listener's brain shifts gear from analysis to experience, and experience reaches further. A story in communication does not have to be long. It does not have to be yours. It can be something you observed, something you were told, something you imagined. What matters is that it is specific rather than abstract, that it has a person doing something in a particular moment for a particular reason, rather than a general principle stated in general terms. The moment you say, there was a person, and this is what happened, and this is what it meant, you have given the listener something to hold, something concrete, something that does not require interpretation before it can be received. The structural principle that underlies all of this is what you might call anchoring. Every piece of communication needs anchors, points of concreteness that ground the abstract, examples that make principles tangible, moments that make arguments real. Without anchors, abstract ideas float. They are intellectually present but emotionally light. They can be agreed with in theory, while leaving no real impression. With anchors, ideas land. They settle into the listener's memory with something solid attached to them. Developing the habit of anchoring your ideas, of asking, what is a real example of this? What does this look like in practice? What can I point to that makes this concrete? That habit will transform your communication more immediately than almost any other change. Let us also address the structural mistake of front-loading. Front loading is when you put all the context and background and qualification before the central idea. You build up and build up and build up, and by the time you get to the actual point, the listener has been waiting so long that their attention has started to drift. They feel the point is being withheld and patience runs out. The instinct to front load comes from a desire to be fully understood before being judged. You want to make sure the listener has everything they need before you say the thing you actually want to say. It feels responsible, thorough, but listeners do not work that way. They need to know where they are going in order to organize the information they are receiving. Without knowing the destination, all that context feels like random facts rather than relevant background. The structural fix is simple but requires courage. Lead with your central idea. Say the thing you want to say first. Then provide the context and explanation. Let the listener receive the destination before you describe the journey. This is counterintuitive, but it works remarkably well. When the listener knows the point, every subsequent piece of information slots naturally into place. They understand why you are telling them this. They know how it connects. They are building their understanding from a foundation rather than waiting for a foundation to appear. Structure, simplicity, and clarity are not constraints on your ideas. They are the conditions that allow your ideas to travel from your mind to someone else's with the least possible distortion. When you communicate with structure, your listener does not have to work as hard. And when they do not have to work as hard, they can receive more, retain more, and feel more connected to what you have said. That is the gift of simplicity, not dumbing down, not leaving out, but making the path from your idea to their understanding as clear and unobstructed as possible. Confidence is perhaps the most misunderstood quality in communication. When most people think of a confident speaker, they picture someone commanding, someone who speaks with volume and certainty, who holds the floor without hesitation, who projects authority simply by being present, someone who seems like they have never doubted themselves in their life. That picture is not confidence. That is performance. And in most real conversations, in most real moments of communication, that kind of performance reads not as genuine confidence but as compensation, as a presentation designed to cover something up. Real confidence is quieter. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to take up extra space to prove it exists. Real confidence is the quiet certainty that what you have to say is worth saying and that you are the appropriate person to say it. And the interesting thing about that kind of confidence is that it is available to almost everyone, not as a fixed personality trait that you either have or do not, but as a state that can be cultivated and accessed through deliberate practice. Let us begin with the relationship between confidence and preparation. Many people experience a lack of confidence in speaking not because they lack inherent confidence, but because they are genuinely underprepared. They have not thought through what they want to say. They are not sure of their ground. They have not considered the possible responses and how they might navigate them. In that state, hesitation is not a confidence problem. It is an information problem, and adding a layer of performed confidence on top of genuine unpreparedness creates a combination that almost everyone can see through. The foundation of real confidence in speaking is knowing your material, not just knowing about it, but having worked with it enough that it feels like your own. When you have thought through an idea fully, when you can explain it from multiple angles, when you understand both its strength and its limits, there is a naturalness to how you speak about it that is indistinguishable from confidence. This is why preparation is not just a logistical step. It is the most important contribution you can make to your own confidence in any speaking situation. Now let us talk about nervous energy, because this is one of the most practically important things to understand. Almost everyone experiences some form of nervousness before speaking in a high-stakes situation, a presentation, a difficult conversation. a meeting where your ideas will be evaluated, a moment when you need to say something important and you want to say it well. Most people treat that nervous energy as a problem to be eliminated. They try to suppress it, calm it down, make it go away. And when they cannot make it go away, they conclude that they are not confident enough, that their nervousness will betray them, that they will be found out. But nervous energy is not the opposite of confidence. It is energy, undirected, unmanaged energy. And the difference between speakers who use it well and speakers who are undermined by it is not the absence of the energy, but the relationship to it. Speakers who use nervous energy well have learned to redirect it. They feel the energy, they acknowledge it rather than fighting it, and they channel it into aliveness, into animation, into the kind of presence that makes their delivery more compelling rather than less. They transform the energy from anxiety into engagement. This is not a trick. It is a shift in relationship. Instead of treating nervousness as evidence that something is wrong, they treat it as evidence that they care about what they are doing, which it is. Nervousness in speaking is almost always care. You are nervous because it matters to you, and that mattering is a resource, not a liability. The practice of this shift is simple. Before a high-stakes speaking situation, instead of trying to calm yourself into neutrality, try acknowledging the energy and naming what it is for. Tell yourself, I am feeling this because I care. This energy is going to help me be more present. It is not my enemy, it is my fuel. That reframing does not eliminate the nervousness, but it changes what you do with it. And that changes everything about how it appears in your delivery. Let us talk about the specific behaviors that undermine confidence and how to address them one at a time. Qualification is one of the most common. This is the habit of hedging almost every statement with phrases like, I might be wrong but, or this is just my opinion, or I think maybe, or correct me if I'm wrong. These phrases, used occasionally, are appropriate and even admirable signs of intellectual humility. But used habitually, on nearly every statement you make, they accumulate into a picture of someone who does not trust their own voice. The listener, reading this pattern, unconsciously adjusts their confidence in what you are saying downward. They begin to think, if even you are not sure about this, why should I be? Reducing over qualification does not mean claiming certainty you do not have. It means stating what you believe clearly when you believe it, and reserving qualifiers for moments when genuine uncertainty is present. The contrast will make your qualifiers meaningful and your confident statements credible. Trailing off is another common confidence underminer. This is the pattern of starting a sentence with clarity and ending it softly, trailing the words into quiet before the sentence is actually complete. It often happens on the most important words, the key point of the sentence, which is exactly where you want the most clarity and strength. The fix is deceptively simple. Finish your sentences. Commit to the last word with the same intention you brought to the first. This is a physical practice as much as a mental one. It requires you to actually open your mouth fully through the end of each sentence, rather than allowing it to close early. Seeking approval mid-speech is subtler but equally undermining. This is the habit of looking to the listener for validation after making a point. The slight eyebrow raise, the question tagged onto the end of a statement, the smile that says, was that okay? Did you like that? Are you still with me? There is a difference between checking in with a listener, which is a sign of awareness and generosity, and seeking approval from them, which is a sign of dependence on their validation for your own confidence. The first strengthens connection. The second weakens your authority. The way to address this is to develop what might be called internal anchoring, the practice of knowing when you have made a good point, not because someone affirmed it, but because you know it is true, clear, and well expressed. That internal knowing, developed over time, becomes the source of your confidence rather than external response. Speaking too quickly under pressure which we addressed in the delivery section, deserves a mention here as well, because it is one of the most visible signs of anxiety. When you slow down in a moment of pressure, you are making a visible choice to remain composed. That choice, made in real time, builds confidence in the observer and in yourself simultaneously. Confidence, ultimately, is not a feeling you wait to have before speaking. It is a practice you engage in through speaking. Every time you commit to a sentence and finish it, every time you choose to pause rather than fill silence with noise, every time you state what you believe without 12 layers of qualification, every time you redirect nervous energy into presence rather than performance, you are practicing confidence. And that practice compounds. Over time, it stops feeling like practice. It starts feeling like who you are. There is a version of influence that most people think of when they hear the word. It involves persuasion techniques, psychological levers, strategies designed to move people toward a particular outcome by working on the edges of their awareness. This version of influence is transactional and often fragile, because the moment the other person realizes what was done, the influence evaporates and the relationship weakens. There is another version of influence that is deeper, more durable, and more aligned with genuine communication, and it comes not from strategy but from clarity. When you speak with real clarity, when your thinking is organized and your delivery is controlled and your presence is genuine, you create an experience for the listener that is relatively rare. They feel understood. They feel the absence of confusion. They feel the quiet relief of someone who has finally been given a clear map of something that was previously murky. That feeling creates trust, and trust is the foundation of all real influence. This is important to understand because it means that the path to influence is not through developing more elaborate persuasive techniques. It is through becoming clearer. The clearer you are, the more people trust your understanding. The more they trust your understanding, the more weight they give to your perspective. The more weight they give to your perspective, the more they are naturally inclined to be moved by it. Influence through clarity does not feel like being pushed. It feels like being led somewhere useful. Let us talk about the relationship between understanding and influence. When you speak to someone, you are implicitly asking something of them. You are asking them to take in your words, process them, consider them alongside their own existing beliefs and understanding, and potentially update or expand that understanding. That is a significant ask, and people only accept that ask when they trust that the person asking has something worth contributing. That trust is built in the first 30 seconds of almost any communication. The listener is making rapid unconscious assessments. Does this person know what they are talking about? Do they understand me and my context? Are they interested in me, or just in delivering their content? Clarity answers all three questions quickly and positively. When your opening is clear, when you arrive at your central idea without fumbling, when you demonstrate early that you have thought about this and know where you are going, you establish credibility before you have said anything technically impressive, and that early credibility makes everything that follows land more effectively. The listener is receptive. They are leaning toward understanding rather than skeptically evaluating. They are ready to be influenced because they have already decided in those first moments that this person is worth listening to. The reverse is equally true. When your opening is confused, when you circle around your point before arriving at it, when you demonstrate early that you are not entirely sure of your ground, the listener's receptivity drops. They are now evaluating rather than receiving, and evaluation is a much harder environment in which to create influence. This is why the opening of any communication, whether a conversation, a presentation, a difficult dialogue, carries such disproportionate importance. The first clear, confident, relevant thing you say sets the listener's relationship to everything that follows. Let us talk about how clarity creates resonance. Resonance is the feeling when something you hear aligns with something you already know but have not been able to articulate. It is the experience of hearing your own understanding reflected back to you, organized in a way you had not quite managed to organize it yourself. Resonance is powerful because it creates immediate connection. The listener does not feel like you are telling them something they did not know. They feel like you have helped them see something they already half knew. And that feeling is much more influential than novelty, because it activates the listener's own knowledge and experience rather than asking them to receive something entirely foreign. Clarity produces resonance because it expresses ideas in their most essential form. When an idea is stated clearly, without unnecessary complexity or jargon, without the protective fencing of over-qualification, it is accessible. And accessible ideas land where they are meant to land, in the part of the listener's mind where their own experience lives. This is why the best communicators often seem, to casual observation, to be saying things everyone already knows. What they are actually doing is saying things everyone already knows in a way that no one else has quite said them. And that quality of precise, essential expression is what creates the response, yes, exactly. That is exactly it. That response is influence at its most complete. The listener has not been pushed. They have been illuminated. And they will remember the person who illuminated them. Now let us talk about the role of listening in influence. This might seem counterintuitive. Influence, in the traditional understanding, is about what you say, about the strength and clarity of your message. But in practice, the most influential communicators are also among the most attentive listeners. Here is why. When you listen carefully, you gather the specific language, the particular concerns, the underlying values and assumptions that the other person is bringing to the conversation. And when you speak with those things reflected in your language, when you address the specific concern rather than a general version of it, when you use words and frames that resonate with their existing understanding, you create a level of relevance and personal connection that generic communication never achieves. Listening before speaking is not a passive act. It is strategic in the deepest sense. It is gathering the information you need to be as clear and as relevant as possible when you do speak. This is also why people who genuinely listen to others are experienced as more intelligent, more trustworthy, and more influential than people who simply speak very well. The listening creates the ground in which the speaking takes root. There is a particular form of clarity that deserves its own discussion in this section, the clarity of your intention. When you speak, the listener is always asking, unconsciously, why is this person telling me this? What do they want from me? What is the purpose of this exchange? When that question has a clear answer, when the listener can feel that you have a genuine and benign purpose, that you are sharing something because you believe it will be useful to them, or because you genuinely want to connect, or because you have something important that needs to be said, the communication flows more easily. There is no confusion about the motive, and therefore no resistance based on suspected motive. When the question is unclear, when the listener cannot quite identify why you are telling them something, or when they suspect a hidden agenda, something closes slightly. They become more careful, more guarded, and that guardedness makes influence nearly impossible. Clarity of intention is therefore not just an ethical quality. It is a communication quality. Knowing what you want from a conversation and being transparent about it, as much as the situation allows, creates conditions for genuine exchange. Being transparent does not always mean stating your intention explicitly. Sometimes it is simply carried in the quality of your engagement, in the fact that you are listening, not just waiting to speak. In the fact that you acknowledge the other person's perspective, even when it differs from yours. In the fact that you are clearly here for the conversation rather than for a predetermined outcome. When your intention is to genuinely communicate, to share, to understand, to be understood, that intention is visible, and it creates the conditions where real influence that comes from clarity and trust rather than technique, becomes possible. Influence through clarity is not something you perform. It is something you earn. Through the quality of your thinking, the care of your delivery, the genuineness of your presence, and the transparency of your intention. When all of those things are aligned, you do not need to persuade. People are simply drawn toward what you are saying because it is clear and it is real, and because real communication is something the world does not offer nearly enough of. You have arrived at the end of this audiobook, but not at the end of the work. The work of becoming a clear, present, genuinely effective communicator is not finished with a final section or a closing insight. It is ongoing. It is a practice that continues in every conversation, every room you walk into, every time you open your mouth to say something that matters to you. But what you leave with, if you have been listening closely, is awareness. And awareness is the most powerful starting point there is. Before this audiobook, you might have known in a vague sense that something in your communication could be better. You might have felt the discomfort of not being heard without being able to identify where the connection broke. You might have recognized the pattern of going on too long or the habit of over-qualifying, but you could not quite name it or trace it back to its source. You have a different kind of awareness now. Not just a feeling that something could be better, but a clearer understanding of what drives effective communication and what undermines it. That understanding changes how you listen to yourself. It changes what you notice. It changes what you can adjust. Let us reflect on what was explored here. You learned that people stop listening, not because they are indifferent, but because something in the speaking has given their attention permission to leave. You learned the specific ways that happens through overload, through lack of direction, through emotional disconnection, through speaking too long without acknowledgement, through uncertainty in the speaker, and through failing to make the communication relevant to the person receiving it. You learned that the foundation of everything is clarity of thought, that the gap most people experience in communication is not between their words and their audience. It is between their thinking and their speaking, and that closing that gap through genuine understanding, through identifying your central idea, through the discipline of simplification, is the most powerful communication investment you can make. You learned that delivery is not style, it is the expression of your internal state. That pace, pause, tone, volume, and articulation are all serving one purpose, carrying your thought into the listener's experience with as little distortion as possible, and that the deepest way to improve delivery is not imitation but presence. You learned that emotional presence is not performance. It is the willingness to be genuinely connected to what you say and genuinely interested in the person you are saying it to. And that this quality of presence, when real, creates a reciprocal opening in the listener that no technique can replicate. You learned that structure and simplicity are not constraints on your ideas. They are the conditions that allow your ideas to travel. That the three-part principle of setup, central idea, and implication gives communication a completeness that listeners instinctively feel. That anchoring abstract ideas in concrete examples and stories makes them accessible, memorable, and real. You learned that confidence is not loudness. It is the quiet assurance that comes from knowing your material, from finishing your sentences, from allowing silence without anxiety, from redirecting nervous energy into presence rather than performance. And that confidence is practiced, not waited for. You learned that real influence comes from clarity and trust, not from technique. That when you speak with genuine clarity and presence and transparency of intention, people are drawn toward what you are saying, not because they have been persuaded, but because they have been genuinely reached. Now let us consider what this means for the conversations ahead of you. The next time you are in a conversation that matters, You will have a choice. You can speak out of habit, the way you have always spoken, running on the default settings of your long, practiced communication patterns. Or you can speak with awareness. You can pause before you open your mouth long enough to ask, what is the one thing I want this person to understand? You can choose your pace deliberately. You can allow your genuine feeling to be present in your voice. You can finish your sentences. None of these things require a transformation. They require a moment of intention before each exchange. And over time, those moments of intention become habit. That habit becomes your natural way of communicating. It is worth saying clearly that this is not a journey toward perfection. Not every conversation will go well. Not every important thing you try to express will land the way you hoped. There will be moments when your delivery is off, when your thinking is not as clear as you would like it to be, when you lose your composure or your clarity or your presence and find yourself back in an old pattern. That is normal. That is human. It is not evidence that you are failing. It is the texture of real growth which never moves in a straight line. What matters is not that you communicate perfectly. What matters is that you communicate with increasing awareness. That over time, the gap between what you mean and what the listener receives grows smaller. That the people in your life begin to feel more heard because you have become more present. That the ideas that matter to you find their way, more often and more clearly, from your mind to the minds of others. That is a meaningful change, and it is available to you not through dramatic reinvention, but through consistent, thoughtful practice of what you have explored here. There is a quality that the best communicators share, and it is not the one most people expect. It is not eloquence. It is not charisma. It is not a particularly powerful or beautiful voice. It is care. They care about what they are saying. They care about the person they are saying it to. They care enough to think before they speak, to listen before they respond, to be present before they perform. And that care shows. It comes through in everything, in the pace of the voice, in the quality of attention, in the genuine feeling that moves through the words. That kind of care is something everyone has access to. It does not require a gift. It does not require a particular background or a particular kind of mind. It requires the willingness to bring yourself fully into the act of communication and to treat the person you are speaking with as genuinely worthy of your best effort. That willingness changes conversations. It changes relationships. It changes how people experience you and how you experience yourself. You began this audiobook knowing that something in how you communicate could be better. You end it knowing something about what better actually means. Not louder, clearer, not more intentional, not different, more genuinely yourself. When your thinking is clear, your words carry precision. When your delivery is controlled, your words carry authority. When your presence is genuine, your words carry feeling. And when all three come together, in the ordinary moments of everyday communication and in the significant ones alike, something shifts. People stop waiting for you to finish. They start wanting to hear what comes next. You do not need to speak more. You need to speak clearly. And when your words become clear, and your presence becomes real, and your intention becomes visible to the people around you, people begin to listen.